an honor for me to be here. I know that everybody says this, but for me to be here in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, in Vietnam, one of my favorite cities, one of my favorite countries, talking to probably my favorite group of people, language teachers, about what I think is the most important topic there is, facilitating language and learning. And I'll be going into this in my speech. I would like to thank the organisers of VUS TESOL for inviting me here today. And also I'd like to thank Oxford University Press for sponsoring my talk and making it possible for me to be here. I was talking to a colleague in Tokyo a couple of weeks ago, and he just returned from a trip to Ho Chi Minh City. And he was raving about Vietnam, talking about the energy, the hard-working people, and the potential of Vietnam. Vietnam is a very young country, and as teachers, you have the privilege and the responsibility to prepare these young people so they can build the future of Vietnam and Asia. And part of that is going to be helping them to develop the motivation and the skills to learn English. Last week I was talking to my daughter about this talk, and she noticed the title. And she said, "Oh, you're going to talk about that film?" No. That was just in passing. Today, what I'll be talking about is some impressions that I've developed recently about teaching, about learning. And at first, I was a little bit hesitant to accept this invitation. I haven't taught in Vietnam. I'm not familiar with Vietnam's educational challenges. However, I do think that the principles I'll be talking about today are valid in Japan, they're valid in Europe, they're valid in China, and therefore I think they might be valid here in Vietnam. You might not agree with everything I have to say, but I hope I can give you some things to think about for the rest of the conference and also when you return to your classrooms next week. There's probably two things you should know about me. My background as a language learner and my background as a language teacher. As a language learner, I was extremely fortunate. I grew up in Spain, speaking 2 languages. I managed to skip the most difficult part of language learning. After that, I studied language in high school. I studied language Chinese in university. As a language teacher, growing up, my mother was an English teacher. And watching her, I decided that I would never become a teacher. Now, 20 years later, I am a teacher. And I love being a teacher. It's a job that I fell into by accident, almost. But it's a job that is so satisfying and so challenging that I'm still doing it today. And I think I'll still be doing it in 40 years' time, 50 years' time. Optimistic. This, I think, is the most important job of the language teacher. And that is to persuade learners that they can learn. For many learners, learning a foreign language is not a natural thing. And for many learners, it's not something that seems easy or natural. For many learners, it seems difficult and unnatural. So, right from the start, when a student comes into your classroom, I think the most important gift you can give them is to persuade them that they have the ability and the potential to learn the language. My students in Japan have the idea that learning English is difficult, it's unusual, and that they will not be able to do it. And it's my challenge to overcome those ideas and persuade them that no, they can. And they will, if they try. These, for me, are the three key factors in language learning. So learner motivation, success, and effectiveness. And I'll talk a little bit about each one as we go through today's presentation. Presentations, I think, are a bit like going to the dentist. The shorter, the better. I'm going to try and get through this and finish on time in order not to keep you from your coffee this morning. Talking about learner motivation, in some ways, this is a difficult topic for teachers because we're kind of expected to help learners become motivated. But it's also a very, very difficult thing to do. And it's very unlikely that teachers have a large effect on this. But there are a few things we can do. I'm going to mention Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. Just to review, basically this is a theory that humans all have needs, and the needs go in order, right? We have to meet the basic needs before we go up to the advanced needs. And here, I'd just like to talk about what teachers can do, specifically. And of course, the first tier of needs, the physiological needs. So, when students come into my class, I think about, are they too hot? Are they too cold? Are they tired? Are they hungry? And often, addressing these needs allows us to help the student to learn more effectively. Next level of safety. Now, luckily, my classroom is not a dangerous place in a physical sense. But some learners might feel unsafe. They might not have a good relationship with their classmates. They might feel that I treat them in a stern or hard way. And it's important to accept that and to figure out which learners feel this way. Next, moving up, we have belonging. And here again is something that teachers can do at the beginning. I find that at the beginning of the course, at the beginning of the class, spending just 1 or 2 hours doing group building activities, making sure the students are comfortable with each other, pays off hundreds of times over later on in the course. Because students can relax, they can work together well, and they can enjoy their English classes. And lots of teachers skip this step. They think, oh, we're very busy, we don't have time to spend a class or 2 doing activities to get used to each other. But that's a false time save, false economy there. In terms of esteem, this is very difficult. Some students come into the classroom and they feel that they're not smart, they can't learn, they're not good at English. And that is something else that a teacher can address by spending time with those students, if you can identify. Talking about motivation, we always divide motivation into these 2 parts: extrinsic motivation from the outside, and the next one, intrinsic motivation from the inside. And it often seems that extrinsic motivation has a bad press. We think it's not as good as intrinsic motivation. But look around. Almost everybody behaves according to the extrinsic motivators around them. Almost everybody here goes to work because they're paid. You might enjoy your work, I hope you do. But if you stop being paid, would you still go? I'm not sure. But the students are the same. We can extrinsically motivate students primarily through our expectations. Having high expectations of can motivate them to achieve more. Of course, intrinsic motivation is possibly more powerful, but very few of my students have a fierce desire to learn English. How many of you brushed your teeth this morning? Did you raise your hand? No pressure. Did you think about it? Did you wake up and say, oh, I must brush my teeth today? Probably not. At some point in the morning, you reached out your hand, you picked up your toothbrush, and you brushed your teeth. And this is the power of habit. This is my granddaughter, Alyssa. We took this a couple of days ago. She agreed to help with the presentation today. And we're trying to create a habit in her at the moment. Right now, that involves taking her to the bathroom, giving her a toothbrush, and praising her exuberantly. Right? It's working. She enjoys brushing her teeth. She still doesn't do it by herself, but it's starting to take hold. And this leads me to this. This is my model of motivation to habit transfer. I believe that we can do this. We can activate this model in students. We start with extrinsic motivation. The students achieve success. They become intrinsically motivated. Success is incredibly motivating. And then slowly it becomes a habit. And once it's a habit, the students don't have to think about it. And this is extremely important because habits do not consume willpower. Recent research shows that willpower is a finite resource. You use it up. The more you try to force yourself to do something, the less able you will be later. For me, this happens when I have a writing deadline. So I force myself to write, and I eat junk food. Normally I can resist eating junk food, but my willpower is gone by trying to force myself to do something. And it's the same with the students. The more they force themselves to study, the less able they'll be to motivate themselves. But if you can create a habit, they don't have to think about that. Think, oh, it's the morning, so I do some language card practice in the morning. Just like reaching for the toothbrush, you reach for your language cards. And I mentioned success just now, and success is so important for students. And the reason it's important is because it gives you that confidence and that motivation that might be lacking. So how can we build success into our classes is the key. I really wish that all teachers, before every single class, could think, okay, what can I do to make sure that my students succeed today? Students should succeed in every class. A student should never leave a class thinking, oh, I couldn't do it today, it was really hard, that was a terrible performance. I think it's okay to push students, but not the entire time. Make sure that there's something they can succeed at. And so we're talking about language learning at this conference. And I think that's a really interesting topic because it's not the same as language teaching. I studied Chinese at Cambridge University. It was an incredible opportunity. I was extremely lucky to be able to go there. But I am also fairly dissatisfied with parts of my experience. Most of my time at Cambridge was wonderful. Incredible peers, incredible teachers, an amazing place of scholarship. However, when I was learning Chinese, my teachers were experts, world-class scholars on Ming pottery, Chinese history, classical Chinese. Not one of them was an expert on language learning or language teaching. And it's not as easy as it seems, I think. to teach a language. Being a native speaker is not enough. Knowing how to use the language is not enough. Language teachers have to be experts at learning languages and at telling their students how to learn languages. And my primary motivation now, as a teacher, is that my students will not think in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, you know, university was great, but Mr. Shearing's classes were completely useless in terms of my practical English ability. And I'd like to ask you a quick question now. What is the purpose of language education? How would you answer this question? Could you just share with your neighbour? I'll give you about 20 seconds to do this, 30 seconds. What is the purpose of language education? Now, I hope most of you will have said something like to allow the students to learn English, right, or to achieve language proficiency. But I find in practice, most language education ends up somewhere on this scale. And in Japan, at least, most of it ends up on this left-hand side. So the purpose of English classes, much like the purpose of the Latin classes that I did in England, is to rank students, to classify them according to their academic ability. Whereas, if we're talking about pure language education, we should be on the right. The purpose is that the students will acquire language proficiency, the ability to use the language. So think about your classes. Where do they fall on this scale? I'm going to run through very quickly a few foundational beliefs about language. For me, language is very much a skill. It's not a set of knowledge. I always explain it to students by saying language is like playing a musical instrument. Language is like a sport. If you're a badminton player, there's only so much you can study about badminton. At the end of the day, you have to go out, you have to practice. And you have to practice easy things, you have to do drills over and over and over again. So, why don't we do more fluency practice in our classes? One example here for me is numbers. I often find even advanced students have trouble saying numbers quickly and fluently. They haven't practiced. Of course they know the numbers, but to do it very, very quickly in an informal context needs practice. They need to groove the skills in. It's almost a physical thing, like muscle memory in a way, language memory. I'm extremely fluent in Thai. I've been to Thailand a few times. I did a short language course in Thai. Extremely fluent. I can only say two things, but I can say them very fluently. I've said them hundreds of times. They slip out anytime. And this is the difference, I think, between language knowledge and language skill. And language knowledge is fantastic, but if you don't have a skill, you can't use it. And how do you get a skill? You practice. The other foundational belief I have is the importance of efficiency. English in particular is a huge language. It's probably twice as big as the next biggest language. It would take thousands, tens of thousands of hours to learn. And this isn't realistic for most of our students, to spend tens of thousands in an immersive environment getting language input. We need shortcuts. We need to tell the students how to study efficiently so that they can get to the minimum level that they need as quickly as possible with the least amount of effort. Effort leads to students giving up. Make it easy for them to succeed, and they can get there. The other foundational belief I have is the importance of individualization. These 3 students are in one of my university classes. I have 40 students in the class. They're not streamed by ability, they're streamed by major. So these are all education majors. They're studying to become teachers. However, Keita wants to become an English teacher. In Japan, an English teacher needs a very strong command of grammar and the ability to explain grammar to students. Hiroshi is interested in history. He doesn't like English. He just wants to finish my class, get a credit, and continue studying what he likes. And Ikumi wants to teach Japanese abroad. So she needs practical English skills for that. What do I teach these students? Unless there is a space in my class, a space in the curriculum, where the students can decide their own content, somebody is going to be frustrated. Probably all 40 of my students are going to be frustrated. But if we can make spaces for them to individualize, to do as much as they feel they need to, then maybe we can meet their needs, even with 40 students in the class. So what is effectiveness? Part of it, I think, we can learn from independent language learners. Recently on the internet, especially, there's been a real rise in people who study languages by themselves, without a teacher, very quickly, online. Now, of course, these people are not normal, right? They like languages, they probably have a skill for languages, but I think we can learn a lot from them. We can look at what they do, and we think, okay, how can we take that and give it to our students as well? This gentleman, Benny Lewis from Ireland, his main thing is that he travels around the world learning languages for 3 months. Tries to become as fluent as possible in 3 months. Tries to get the accent, be able to talk to people. His main focus is on individualization, the language he needs right now, and extremely focused practice. So he does very focused speaking practice every day. And he gets fairly good results. If you look at his videos on YouTube, at least the languages that I know, he's very proficient in those languages. And you can see the progression from absolute beginner to intermediate in about 3 months on the speaking level. This gentleman, I think it's an alias, he's famous because he learned Japanese in 18 months while living in America. And his shtick, as it were, is to customize his environment. So while living in America, attending university, studying computer science, he made his entire life Japanese. All his posters were Japanese, he only read Japanese books and comics, he only watched Japanese TV and movies. And the internet now gives us the ability to do something like this. Obviously extreme, but his Japanese is probably better than mine. I studied Japanese in Japan for 14 years. He did 18 months at home. Now, obviously, most of our students aren't going to be able to do this, but we can take some of these ideas and try and tell the students successful strategies for learning languages. This is the final one, Steve Kaufman. He is input evangelist. So he listens to the language, he reads the language, preferably both at the same time. And after a few hundred hours, he feels comfortable when he starts speaking. Very highly input-driven. Pretty much the opposite of this gentleman. And they've had fights online about whose method is better. I like both. So, until now, we haven't really talked about the teacher much. Where's the teacher in all this? Right, we're talking about language learning. It's all about the learners. It's all about what the learners do. This book is excellent. Very, very down-to-earth practical advice. And in it, formation lists the jobs of the teacher in order of importance. The most important thing is to plan a good course, to make sure you have a balanced course with the right and the language in it. The next is to organize learning opportunities for the students. So make sure that the students are in situations where they can hear the language, use the language, and teach them how to learn. When I was 18 years old, and I went to Cambridge University, speaking Spanish, speaking okay French, speaking German, I didn't know how to learn languages. Well, I needed to be taught explicit strategies for languages, how to use flashcards, how to organize notes, how to find content, how to do repetitive fluency practice. If my teachers had given me just a couple of hours of guidance, it would have made all the difference. Fourth on this list is to test the students. Make sure that they are making progress. See what they're good at, see what they're weak at. And finally, it's teaching. At the end, it's the least important job of the teacher, to teach. So, are we obsolete? The future of language learning is increasingly moving online. We've got MOOCs, we've got online courses, we've got online testing, we've got online learner management systems. In Korea, they have a Ho school system, and recently they've been using a system where one teacher teaches thousands of students via video link. The best teachers become superstars. The other teachers become unemployed. Right? Technology enables this. So, are we destined for this trash heap? I don't think so. But I do think that teachers need to change a little bit going forwards. In the past, the teacher was the source of knowledge. The teacher gave language to the students, explained language, taught grammar. All of this is online now. It's probably more effective online. So teachers need to change to more useful, perhaps, skill modalities. Teachers have experience. Teachers have experience of teaching lots of different learners. We can categorize our learners and help them based on who they are and how they learn. Teachers have a wide variety of knowledge, not about the language particularly, but about how to teach it, how to learn it. Teachers have expertise in using resources and finding resources. I'm going to run through really quickly 4 case studies from my own teaching experience and talk about these things very briefly. So one is an extensive reading class. The main challenge with extensive reading is designing a program, setting goals for the students, finding resources. This is a systemic problem. And over 6 years, we developed a fairly effective system for this. These are constant tweaks to the system. And working on a concept that students should be able to do as much as they feel they want to. The students should be able to choose their materials, and so far, it's been extremely motivating for our learners, and they've succeeded in a way that we didn't really anticipate. 2 is a discussion class. Now, the main challenge with discussion in Japan is that students have never had a discussion in school, in Japanese. So coming into an English class, they don't know what to do. We got around this by making a very specific model for the students. So we wrote out a model discussion. It sounds very simple, but it completely revolutionized the class. The first class, the students have a script, and they go through, they read the script together in groups, they practice, and by the end of that, they know what's expected. They might not be able to do it, but they have an image of what to do. And this is really important, I think, when introducing almost anything to the students. Give them a model of how it works. My third challenge is online study. So in this classroom, I had 60 students, and for me the challenge was the room. Normally I have my students interact, but this room is extremely difficult to do so. The numbers, 60 students. I don't know what the numbers are like in Vietnam, but 60 is a lot in Japan. And the way I got around this is by flipping the classroom. So I had the students do most of the work at home, online. When they came into the classroom, we used the resources that they had, which is each other and me. So we actually ended up with an online study, pretty much discussion type class. But they did all the online study outside. The other thing is we individualized it. The students could pretty much decide what they were going to do. And the final one is presentation class. And the challenge here is to take something that's extremely complex, presented, and to break it into small pieces so that students can learn each skill. They can focus on each skill at a time and build up the complete package slowly. And again, we allow the students to choose the content so they can present about things they were interested in. And that's the key to making it success and interest. So the common elements in these classes. Student success. Every one of these classes, the students experience success right from the beginning. In the extensive reading class, they finished reading the book in English. For a lot of them, that was the first time they'd done that. And that was a huge thing. And then the second book, the 10th book, the 20th book. Most of our students read 200,000, 300,000 words in a 15-week semester. For the discussion class, the students realized that they were able and enjoyed sharing their ideas together within our framework, within the models. For online study, students realized that they had all sorts of tools at their disposal, and that some of them, different ones for each student, were enjoyable to use. And for the presentation class, students at the end of the semester could give a 5-minute presentation in English without notes to their colleagues. And most of them were interesting, funny, and the students were blown away by their improvements. So, so habit creation. So we had success, first of all, and then habit creation. Seinfeld, who is an American comedian, describes his work habits as each day he writes, he puts a cross on the calendar. And you just want to do a little bit at the beginning. But after you have 5 or 6 crosses, you really don't want to break that chain. Right? And the more crosses you build up, the more motivated you are to continue with your habit. That's one thing, consistency and tracking. The second thing is to make it very, 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 very small. If you start off with a difficult habit, you won't continue. If I said to myself, right, I'm going to go and run for 60 minutes every day, I'd probably make it through 2 or 3 days and then stop. But if you say to yourself, I will run for 2 minutes every day, it's so easy that you cannot fail. And eventually you will want to increase the duration, the intensity, while continuing the habit. Documentation was a key for us. And it was a real revelation how useful this is for teachers. So we created, the book is for teachers, but the A4 handout is for students, and it basically explains everything about the class. What you're expected to do, the reasoning behind the class, what kinds of homework, models of how to achieve the homework, and it's all bilingual, so it's in Japanese and English. And so right from the first 5 minutes of class, students understand exactly what they have to do. There's two main benefits from this. One is that the students feel comfortable, they feel safe, and it allows them to succeed. For the teacher, it saves hundreds of hours of answering questions and correcting student work. If you give students a good model, they can correct their own work. We do timed writing activities with I have 800 students. I do timed writing with pretty much all of them. And can you imagine giving feedback to 800 students a week on a 20-30-minute timed writing exercise? Impossible. But because we've given them a couple of models, I can just give them a score. And that tells them it's good enough or not. If it's not good enough, they go and they look at the models, they think, how is mine different from the model? Saves infinite amounts of time. And routines is the other one. Having a very fixed routine. At first, when I started teaching, I thought routines are dehumanizing, right? How does this fit in with my individualization idea? The answer is that a routine saves time. If you have a set routine where students come in, hand in their homework, start doing something, that gives you time as a teacher to talk to students one-on-one. That's where the individualization comes from. This is where you gain the time to see to your students. And finally, devolution. So we devolved the content to the students as much as we could. For the discussion class, the students wrote, they chose the topics and they wrote the questions for the discussions. And then the following year we used those questions and so on. So it was all student created. Most of the models were made by the students. For the presentations, the students chose what to present about. This is very easy to do, even if you're using a textbook. If you have a textbook, anything, any topic-based activity, you can flip and turn it over to the students. Change the topic to something you're interested in. So looking at the bigger picture very quickly, once you're happy with your classroom, it's time to step up and take a look at your school or your system. How does your class fit in to the others? Do they fit well? Do the students advance, or are they unconnected? I work in a completely unconnected system. And the quality loss that we have there is huge. So this is a good place to gain some efficiency. I'd like to introduce this concept very quickly, curriculum engineering. And this is based on the idea of Kaizen, which is a Japanese management practice, where you make very small changes constantly. But over time, those very small changes become huge. And that's what we've seen happen with our classes. Every couple of weeks, pretty much, we tweak something. So, okay, how about instead of 25 minutes for writing, we just do 20. We see how it goes that week. If it's good, we keep it. If it's not good, we go back to the old system. We get student feedback for these changes. Just constantly working on the class. Don't be satisfied with your class. There's always another small efficiency gain to be had. This is where Toyota got its power from, right? This tweaking of systems. And the other one is the language coach. And this, for me, is almost the ideal of a language teacher. It's not somebody who explains things. It's somebody who designs a learning program, gives feedback to students as they do it, encourages them, and basically works as a coach. And I think this is the only meaningful role for teachers in the future. The role of technology. I've seen some incredible technology this year. Word Lens, it's an app for iOS, I don't think you've seen it. Simultaneous translation using a phone of simple signs and things. Incredible. Microsoft just revealed their Skype simultaneous interpretation function. It might not be perfect now, but it will be in 4 or 5 years. So the key here, I think, is not to be discouraged, but to try and master technologies and then be able to advise your students about them. The teacher will not become extinct, but the teacher that doesn't understand where language learning is going might. So this is the key. You have to be a language learner yourself. You have to know how to do it so that you can help your students with it. And here's where non-native English teachers have a huge advantage, I think, because you are language learners every day. And that is a huge advantage in terms of this. So what to think about? For the rest, this is particularly for when you go back to your classrooms. Think about the bigger picture. Where does your class fit into other ones? Think about strategies and resources you can tell your students about. Because, to be honest, we don't have enough time to teach our students language. But we can encourage them to learn it themselves on their own time. Push them to do independent learning. Try and individualize your class. Think about how you can encourage habits in your students. Maybe encourage them to start using vocabulary cards every day. Start with 3. That's so easy, you can't fail. And try to devolve the content. Allow your students to decide what they want to talk about. We were talking about Benny Lewis earlier. The first thing he learns in any language is I'm a translator. That's his job. If you look at most language courses, translator will be towards the end of the course, right? You're not going to learn it. But if you are a translator, you need to learn it on the first day. And all our students have words like this. They have the vocabulary that they need, they have the situations they're working in. And they have to have the space to get that necessary language quickly and effectively. So back to the 3 factors. Learner motivation, which we can encourage by telling students or persuading students that they can learn, and by having high expectations of them. Success, which happens in small pieces. And effectiveness, using the right resources, the right strategies to learn. So here's my contact information. If you need to get in touch with me, if you want to complain about any aspects of the talk,